Welcome to episode 11 of the International Web Effectiveness Podcast, where Bill Hunt and I, Bill Scully, focus on the strategies and techniques necessary to improve your web presence and manage your global websites. In our last episode, Centralizing Web Operations, we shared how centralizing your web management can have a significant impact on both your SEO and development processes. And we also provided some insights on how to optimize ticketing systems to make everything run more smoothly. If you haven't heard that one, you should check it out. In this episode, we want to extend the discussion and talk about the challenge of structuring your website to mirror your organizational structure. But before we get into that, I want to bring up a LinkedIn post from Mark Williams Cook that we both commented on together. This is about how internationalization is also about technology, not just hreflang and text, specifically mobile device internet speed. I know I've been in situations where I'm reliant on my phone to get some information, and the site that I'm on is just dog slow, depending on the connection speed. What are your thoughts on this, Bill?
I think it's something that not as many people think about, especially if you're in a big market and you're not thinking about other people will interact with it. Having been to over 100 countries, I've faced exactly what you've done, is you go somewhere and you try to get the address to your hotel or something. And then, as you said, it's dog slow. It takes forever to download because we're loading all kinds of stuff. And I think as we keep to our theme of web effectiveness, I think being mindful of the connection speed that people have in other markets. Google's put a lot of emphasis around mobile friendliness and page speed, and yet too many companies, I think, still want to overload these websites because they're being viewed on high-speed connections, and everybody in their offices and many people, especially in the US at home, have high speed. So I think be mindful of that, especially if you're targeting markets. Ask your colleagues, do some research to see how your site is performing in some of these. So it was really good that Mark posted this in the context about really thinking about this. And it clicked for me, having been on trips where, it just takes forever to download some of the simplest stuff because people have huge images in there. But just be mindful of it and think about, okay, is this working for folks? And even in dev tools, you can adjust the speed. Look to see how it works on a 2G or even something slower, because there's many markets where that's the prominent way people are accessing information.
Yeah, that's a really good point about looking at it in dev tools. You could also change the screen size to see what it looks like on a mobile device. Just this morning, I sent a note off to somebody that I wasn't able to use their input field on a phone, and it was because there was a CSS overlap that was in conflict. But yeah, it's something that I keep in the back of my mind. I probably should be more conscious of this when I'm working with people. Just thinking out loud, there's probably web pages where you could really lessen the load for the specific user intent. Maybe they don't need your big footer and all of that stuff. If there's a critical thing they could do on your site with the one-page view.
Yeah, I think that's key. Think about the use case. How is a user going to use this? And especially if you see high abandonment rates in markets, drop off those one-click wonders that in markets, and then just take a look at this article. It's a little dated. We're trying to find an updated internet speed, but it's just something to think about, that especially if you're targeting parts of the world that have notoriously slow internet. If you look at what they're trying to do with Starlink and others, how you've got Zuckerberg trying to fly gliders and balloons across parts of Africa to allow people to at least get episodic internet connections and things like that. So yeah, if you're targeting these markets, not everybody's got a high speed. So yeah, just check it out, something to have in the back of your mind.
And we'll have a link to that LinkedIn post by Mark in the show notes. Okay, so on to our main topic here. Many companies create web presence to mirror their business structure. It creates a significant amount of duplicate content. Sometimes there's business arrangements that can further complicate web performance. We talked about this a little bit in our previous episode, but in this episode, we're going to dig a bit deeper and present the challenges and how you can minimize the negative impact. Bill, why don't you kick this off?
Yeah, I think people's heads probably spinning with that cycle. What do you mean? It needs to represent my company. And let's just take a moment to talk about these structures that we're talking about. So really, these are larger companies that use departments and verticalization. They might create something like enterprise, mid-size, SMB, or they'll have a consumer section. And the problem is that they will have products, the same product in every one of these product categories. So we might have server software and solutions, by the way, are a combination of consulting software and server. So the same products get bundled in there. And then I think the most egregious to this are industry verticals. And this is where an example I would give, I remember probably the craziest feedback I ever got from a client was around rugged laptops. So these are those indestructible laptops, and they had 22 verticals, everything from mining to construction to defense, anybody that needs basically a semi-indestructible laptop. And they all wanted to rank for phrases like indestructible computers or rugged laptops, which is the category name. And even a couple years ago, it would be tough to get more than one or two of these units there. And then, but especially nowadays, it's if you can get one, you're doing great. So which of these 22 is it? If somebody's doing a query for rugged laptops and I don't know, maybe they're smart enough to if defense comes up or if mining comes up that they can see that. But if that's the page that Google's presenting is the one from the mining, it may not have even indexed the others. Just like we've talked about with hreflang, if you have 30 English language websites and Google can't deduce that they're specifically to a market, it may actually suppress 29 of them. And in this case, that's what was happening. And I've worked with 4 or 5 companies that sell these, and that was a big challenge. And that it's even more amplified that the answer to them when we say, look, let's just create one rugged laptop page and let's let that be the magnet to bring people to it. And then from there, we can send them out if there's something unique for people that work in mining or people that work in defense. But for the most part, they're basically looking for that. And same thing with these artificial sales segmentations. I've never had, of the millions of queries that I've mined, I've never seen a query where somebody put in enterprise servers or
Yeah.
SMB servers or small business server, or they just don't. That's an artificial clustering you created to manage salespeople or to put content. And so when you, and again, you can have these on your website. We're not saying you can't, but be mindful of the impact when you've got redundancy across products.
Yeah, that's very common. I see you doing keyword research and people don't basically raise their hand and use a market term in a search. Like it could be anything from except for maybe, well, I'm thinking out loud here. So except for maybe military, because there's things that are specific to contracts and where you might have to go and get some certifications, they would use military. I've seen that. But for things like for electronic names, for most product names, people aren't going to be putting in their industry. And I like the idea where you would have one page that really you bring all of your resources to help rank that page, and then you can push them off into the markets. I think markets work really well from a homepage, and that's a great place to show your experience specific to the market. But trying to rank different market pages for the same product is almost impossible.
And I think that's an interesting point. This idea you've got somebody wants to buy something like, I don't know, at random. Let's say I'm looking to buy a car and maybe I've got an affinity to Jeep or BMW or whatever manufacturer. I might come to Jeep.com and look and see what Jeep has to offer. But if I'm looking, and then that's when we need to represent it. And I think, and again, that's where it makes sense. I'm not saying you, because I can guarantee in 30 years, I've never been able to convince anybody that they should unravel that corporate hierarchy that's represented on the website. It's just never going to happen. The UX people, the people, that's how they think, that's how they act. It's just not going to change. So I'm not worried about somebody hearing this and putting in a rec to go and take all that out of there. It's just not going to happen.
And that's how
But
they
you might,
report. The problem is that's how they
exactly.
report, and they're segmented, and there's not a central web management.
And all 22 of those verticals, that was the challenge I had, is I had all 22 verticals all had a KPI requirement to increase the sales of these rugged laptops, and they wanted to use search to do it.
Hmm.
And because they had these KPIs, and because, oh, we've created this content. And we think in a one way, this is a Google problem. And this is really the big macro question is, can Google understand your structure? Can Google understand that you need 22 of these? Now we have hreflang to say we have these 22 countries, but we don't have the equivalent to say these 22 laptops have this same purpose. They're indestructible. They're for verticals. And so this is exactly, you nailed it. This is the delta between what a company wants to do and what managers need to do to hit their KPIs and how it might be interpreted by Google. But I just don't want this to be a Google problem. It's actually not a Google problem. It's a you problem. But there's other things like, how do we maintain that? We need to write that. And we've seen this where we have content creators within each of these silos. And then there might be templates within each of these silos. And so now we've increased our workload on this content just because we've created websites that match these structures, whatever it may be, in presenting this content on the web. And we're doing this both to make it findable and discoverable, but also, and a lot of that comes from search. Because if somebody goes out and does a rugged laptop, I guarantee you they're not going to hope to land on somebody's homepage and then drill down. They want that page. Now, if they do know that Dell or Panasonic or HP, the people who make these, if they think, oh, I think Dell makes these, I'm going to go to Dell.com. And like you said, they're going to go to notebooks, try to find rugged, and then, oh, okay, I'm in mining. So here's some mining reference. So that makes total sense. But the person who Googles it is not looking, again, it's the risk of which of the 22 get it. Now, if somebody lands on one and they see big yellow bulldozers versus a bunch of people in camouflage wearing flak jackets and helmet, or maybe the body armor if they're SWAT or something like that, they're probably not going to say, this isn't for me, because they see the product. So, but again, I think it's managing those expectations. And then how do we manage this when we launch a product? And it's typically there is a product team that then provides information to all of these. And so I think that's another one that is challenging. And now the way that Google is really restrictive on who they present, I think companies may need to rethink this and circle back, say, all right, let's create a page that we want to be found in search. We want to send people to in social media. And then from there, we need a way to create sort of the hub and spoke to send them out into their respective to find any nuances we might have for that vertical.
Yeah, that's great. So I think there's a couple things people can do to start solving this problem. One would be educate the internal stakeholders on best practices. You can organize workshops or presentations, explain why a unified content strategy benefits everybody. This would be harder, but you could realign KPIs to reflect collaborative goals. And I think if you could always fall back and optimize for user intent and search behavior, everybody should understand that when somebody's searching for rugged laptops, they're looking for a rugged laptop. And like you said, if somebody landed on a military page, they might immediately reject that product because they don't know there's other markets. Like people don't normally land on a page and say, oh, what market am I in? And it's just not for the typical plumber or who would need someone else who would need a rugged laptop in a field. Any other ideas?
And yeah, one of the things that I've done when I've had managers, senior managers, typically, like somebody that's over verticals or even somebody on the product side, they would say, all right, let's look at this theory. And all we would do is we would create, like I said, that those pathways into the verticals or into the markets or groups, and we could build a pie chart. and say, of the people who came to Rugged Laptops, 2% of them went into the military, or 3% went into this group or whatever. And then what this particular company did, once we had the data, they were like, I don't think we need all of those. So they did cut 4 or 5 of them that they found nobody was going into. The brand team or that product team were upset because that's what they would send to a customer to say, hey, here's our whatever, yeah, our plumber or plumbing or agriculture rugged laptop type page. But I think that's one way you can test it. Are people actually going into that vertical? Because I think, we can look at this as a way to prune some content that might not be that effective. You can even use things maybe around canonicals. If it's not going to work for Google and you don't want to take away from that main page, you could maybe canonical those to it where it's still there. It's a page out in the wild. Users can get to it, do their thing, comes through navigation. But you're just not worrying that necessarily Google's going to. It's unlikely something that deep in the bowels of the site is going to beat something a little higher in the hierarchy, or it's get more links to it. But stranger things have happened.
Yeah. Okay. That's all great stuff. And for our listeners, I hope you're finding value in these conversations and strategies. If you're enjoying the show, we'd really appreciate it if you take a moment and rate and review the podcast on your favorite platform. We also want to hear from you. Your feedback helps motivate us to keep making these and tailor future episodes to what matters most to you. You can follow International Web Mastery on LinkedIn, Facebook, and X, and leave your feedback there. Okay, Bill, so we've got a couple other things we want to also cover in this topic. One of them is legal. You want to jump into that?
Yeah. So along with these hierarchies that we talked about, enterprise, midsize, as well as the verticalization, there's also legal structures. And I've had a couple issues in the past couple of weeks where this came up that really prompted this discussion around Google doesn't care about how your company is structured, where one in particular, a large enterprise company approached us and said, hey, we want to do a demo of href Builder. And basically in his signature, there was the brand, and he was the global head of SEO. And so what we did, we put it together, and it was 100 markets. And when we got on the demo, we're going to have to delete most of these because I'm only responsible for about 8 to 10 of these markets. Even though he's the global head of SEO, he was the global head of SEO for a region. And that's the interesting thing, is that when you've carved up your company, and there's many reasons why you would do it. You've got a North American group, you've got a European group, an APAC group, a Latin America group, and the people are responsible for that. And as we talked about in both the contracts and about centralization, some of the negative impacts of having this structure, this was one where he was only responsible and directly said, I cannot spend money on anything that includes a market that's outside of my responsibility. And so you want to ask the obvious question of, that's not how this works. That if you don't have these markets, and the call was started with, here's the level of cannibalization we have. It's the US site, it's the Australian site that's eating into the traffic from these other markets. But they weren't going to be part of the project because he doesn't control them. He doesn't have the budget to do them. And another one we face a lot, we talked about in the contracts as well, if you're licensing your brand, trying to get some language in there to say, look, we're going to have a come together and work together moment. And this is an example where somebody may come in and license your brand for, say, the UAE, and they put up an Arabic site. And then 6 months later, somebody comes in from Saudi Arabia and they license it. And again, this is like even a .com with a folder, or in some cases, they'll do it with a ccTLD, but it's 100% that brand. So now we have a conflict between the same products in Arabic trying to rank. And Google's, I already got one of these. I don't need the other one. So the new guy from Saudi Arabia, his site may not rank. And at the end of the day, he's the only one that really cares about that. The guy in the UAE is getting the beneficiary of all the Arabic traffic. The guys who license it, they got the thrill of the hunt of getting an expensive license that they sold. So these kind of things can create problems, both ranking problems, again, different web architecture problems. So it's all things I think we need to think about when we deploy this. As you add each additional market, we need to think about this. In upcoming episode, we're going to talk about consistent and uniform URL structures. So this fits perfectly into that. Is you're licensing or as you're launching or you're creating separate entities, we need to have a way to try to encourage them at least and give them guidance on uniform web structures and things like that.
Yeah, and I keep going back to this good reason to centralize. The UAE and Saudi Arabia don't even use the same currency. So the web guy might be getting a bonus because of the traffic, but he's not getting any sales in the other region. And yeah, like you said, he really doesn't care about the other region. So good things. I want to remind people of our free Facebook group where we use that as an opportunity to discuss these things. And you can ask any questions you want. You can also suggest ideas for upcoming podcasts. You can find that by searching International Web Mastery Free Group. And then finally, we wanted to talk about different web structures, infrastructures, CMS systems, right?
Yeah, that's the whole thing. Who pays for them? Who makes the decision? And I was talking to my wife earlier this morning, and she's working with a company that every one of them is different. And at the end of the day, it was because one, asked for the flexibility to do their own thing, but because there was no guidance at all. Now, whether it's a mandate, a requirement, a rule that you use this infrastructure, or you use this CMS, or you use this, whatever it is, template, even if it's not mandatory, many people would greatly appreciate any sort of recommendations and examples. And I think it's things like that. Maybe there's a cost reason why you can't use the same CMS. Maybe there's a resource, whether it's people. Like I know of $1 billion company that has one guy in the office that manages like a 47 market websites through the main interface, because they view the web as just a business card or a brochure. So they don't invest in it. Every time they want to add a new market, this poor guy is taking on all of that responsibility for that. So there's many reasons, again, why you may not have it. And at least try to recommend consistency. And going back to some of our earlier episodes where we talked about centers of excellence, or just getting the people together to talk about, hey, how do we, if we're going to deploy into a new market, what are 5 things that we want you to do? Uniform URLs, a similar CMS or the same CMS would be awesome. This is the product set that you have. A common problem is a lot of times not every market sells every product. And we've dealt with this with a variety of companies where they don't sell that product in every market, but people may be aware of that product. It's not sold in France, or it's not sold. The biggest one I encounter is products available in the United States and Canadians seeing it on TV. And so it's not even available in Canada yet. Or we've had them with shoe companies where there was one in particular where a shoe was worn by I think the top 3 of the top 5 finishers at the Boston Marathon, and it wasn't available in Australia yet. And the Australian guys were upset because they created a placeholder page to tell Australians about this new magical shoe, but all the traffic was going to the US. And they didn't even have the sheet on the product yet to build this page. They just had a picture and a couple of top levels. So sharing that and making that available to people, all of this, think about, okay, how can we make their life easier? How can we standardize? How can we get some consistency? Are all huge things you should be thinking about.
Hey, I want to pull on that idea of not having a product in your region. Normally, I would handle that by having a global website set as the X default. Is that how you would do it?
Yeah, it's just there's 2 examples. I know there's one example that you're as familiar with as I am. I just don't want to, give their name, but people are aware of this product, or they might see it. The biggest frustration I have with some spirits brands is I will see something in duty free. And
Only available in duty free.
it's only available in duty free, and nobody knows that. Unless there might be a little placard there saying only available here. When you think, oh, that's just a sales thing, and you go back home and once you finish that bottle, you're like, man, this is great. I really like this. And you go to buy it and it's nowhere to be found. And maybe if they have it on a global site, at least tell you, hey, it's only available in duty free. Wouldn't it be interesting if you had a link where you could click it and say, hey, let me know when this is available in my market, or if it's sold broadly, but roll them up somewhere, because if they that's the point. If they're aware
Yeah.
of the product, give them some information. You may not be able to sell in their market, but let them know that. And that brings a whole nother, at the risk of going over time, I see this a lot with product availability and market and regional licenses. I've worked with gaming companies, not casino, I've worked with them too, but casino games have this too where they can't, but I'm talking about like video games where, Belgium may have a license that they can only sell it at a certain price to people in Belgium, and maybe, the Dutch can sell it at another price only to Dutch. And so to gate this, they end up using IP detection. And what if somebody is not there? But then the classic problem we see is we had this in Latin America where people were searching for this game plus price. And it was showing up either local regional retailers or local retailers. Google was showing the price as X. But then when the person would go to buy, they would be redirected over to, let's say, Peru. And Peru, it might have been 20, 30% more. So we end up with these, and it's a legit scenario, just like with dark markets. We've had this issue where a company cannot sell in a market. And so it's gated, but people still search for it there. And they don't necessarily tell them that it's not available, or these are all merchandising challenges. But it is, again, it's being indexed, or people are aware of it and people are searching for it and discovering it, and they just want information. So maybe tell them it's not currently available or not legally available in your market. Here, hey, by the way, the next time you fly through Dubai, make sure that you pick it up at duty free. I mean, anything to, other than just sort of routing them somewhere where they can't do, or giving them a page saying, hey, very coldly, it's not available in your market. Do something to try to interact. And again, this is collaboration and coordination between markets.
Right. Yeah, it's not uncommon for me to battle let's put every product you have on the global site. And I get pushback. Well, it's only available in the US, but there's other people searching for it.
Correct.
And if they hit the US page, there's nothing that says it's not available in their market. All right.
Merchandising, marketing. Yeah.
What's that?
Merchandising and marketing. Again, this is the essence of this web effectiveness. How are you making your web presence more effective? With simple things like that, right? Because maybe that people managing that global site that has the full portfolio of products, they're not thinking in terms of how this works for other markets. Even that simple message. The one that drives me insane is when a big thing I see people do now is they're using CDNs, and specifically Cloudflare, as their gating mechanism. I encountered this with someone. I was just in Lithuania, and someone asked me the question of this: why are we being gated? How come we see this? And what's this cryptic 250 character thing here? And so I could see it was a 403 statement that you were blocked from entering this website. And they're like, I'll just change my VPN and go look at it in another market. So people know how to get around it. But again, that cryptic statement that's just like this, you can't enter this site, but it doesn't say you can't enter, all because they're using it to gate people. Are just things that I think, again, if the right people were thinking about this, what's the experience you're giving that user? And maybe instead of just coldly gating them at the front door, I mean, it's even at the gate before you walk into the yard, if you will, or having a doorman that's, tells them to go away before they even have a chance to ask them what they want. I think these are things I think we need to think about, especially, again, we're going to have to do a session on when you try to use brute force and use something like a Cloudflare for moving people around or blocking people and keeping people out of certain content. I think while it's efficient maybe for developers, it's inefficient and it's a poor user experience.
Yeah. All right, that's a wrap on the issues of structuring your website to mirror your organization. And what we wanted to talk about was how to improve findability, increasing customer satisfaction. I think the key takeaway here is aligning your website architecture to your internal structure is going to create issues for both users and search engines. Try to focus on the searcher's intent, helping people guide your visitors through the categories from other means of just the product. Bill, anything you want to say to wrap up?
No, I think that's about it. Just as you mentioned earlier, come check out the different courses. We're going to try to put a few of these mini courses up related to some of these most recent ones around intent and some worksheets and best practices around how to think about some of this stuff, just even as a checklist. So keep watching out for on the Facebook page or on the International Web Mastery site for this information.
Great. That's it for the episode. Thanks for listening. Hey, this is Bill Scully. I just wanted to let you know that we have a free training course called Demystifying hreflang. It includes 6 modules and is over an hour long with a quiz at the end of each module. You can find it at internationalwebmastery.com. Hope to see you there.